The co-op meeting ran long that spring, and when my father came back up the hill past dark, he didn't say a word until he'd hung his coat. Then he told me what the engineers had decided about the long acre, that the rust had gone too deep, that the soil counts on our parcel hadn't cleared minimum in 3 seasons running, that come autumn the families on the ridge would be folded into the south plots where the old terraform arrays still ran true. He said it like a man reading a weather report. I said nothing back, because I already knew what I meant to do about it, and arguing with him before I'd done it would only have given him time to talk me out of it. We had worked that ground 3 generations, my grandmother first, when the colony was still raw and the terraform towers still hummed at night, then my father, then me beside him since I was tall enough to walk a furrow straight. The dirt out there was the color of an old wound, and every spring it gave us a little less than the spring before. At the field's eastern edge, where the plow always had to swing wide, sat a boulder we'd called the Old Watchman for as long as anyone could remember, a squat, shouldered shape, half-sunk, weathered the same red-gray as everything else on that ground. My grandmother used to say it watched the field the way an old dog watches a door, waiting on someone who wasn't coming back. Nobody had ever cleared the dirt all the way down around it. There hadn't been a reason to. That spring I gave myself a reason. Every evening after the real work was done, I went out with a hand spade and a bucket and cleared dirt away from the Old Watchman's base, an inch at a time, the way you'd clear a wound you didn't want to look at too fast. My father thought I was being sentimental about a rock. He wasn't wrong, not exactly. I told him I wanted to know what we were leaving behind before we left it. He let me have that. It took most of a month before the spade found something that wasn't stone the way stone is supposed to be. A seam, hairline, running where a shoulder would run if a shoulder were carved into granite. I worked the seam for 3 more evenings before I understood I wasn't clearing a rock at all. I was clearing a shape that had been kneeling in our field since before our family had a name for it, head bowed, arms folded down into the ground like something that had simply stopped, mid-motion, and let the dirt close over it. I didn't tell my father at first. I told myself I would, once I'd cleared enough to be sure. By the time I was sure, half the families on the ridge had heard a rumor and come to see for themselves, and I had no choice but to keep digging in front of an audience. The evening I finally cleared the last of the soil from across its folded arms, the light was already going long and gold across the furrows, and a dozen of us stood around the hollow I dug, nobody saying much. The thing was carved the way nothing in this colony had ever been carved, not poured, not printed, carved. Every line of its plating cut by something with more patience than I had ever had in my life. I put my hand flat against its chest, the way you'd put a hand on a horse to tell it you weren't afraid of it, and I felt the stone under my palm hold a warmth that had no business being there after a winter in the ground. The glyphs woke under my hand first, a thin gold-violet line tracing up through a seam in the plating like water finding the lowest point, then branching, then catching across the whole carved chest until the light came up through every cut groove at once. The warmth turned to something closer to a pulse. Someone behind me said my name, low, the way you say a name when you want a person to step back and don't want to startle them into staying put instead. I didn't step back. The shape unfolded itself slow, the way something that has been still a very long time unfolds. Not a flinch, not a lunge, just a kneeling figure rising by degrees out of ground. It had worn smooth around itself for longer than our colony had existed, soil sliding off carved shoulders in dry red sheets, the light running brighter through every groove as it rose, until it was no longer kneeling in the dirt but kneeling on it, upright, head still bowed. One arm coming free of the ground at last, and turning palm up before me, open, lit from within like something offering rather than something reaching. Nobody on that ridge made a sound. My father had gone still beside me with his hand half raised, not to stop me, I think, just because his body didn't know what else to do with itself. Old Pell from the next plot over had his cap off and pressed flat against his chest without seeming to notice he'd done it. The Dunmore boy, who was 8 and afraid of nothing, had backed himself into his mother's skirts and stayed there. Even the wind off the ridge seemed to have thinned out and gone quiet, as if the whole evening had narrowed itself down to that one hollow of upturned dirt, and the thing rising slow out of it. I put my palm against the stone palm, because it seemed like the only honest thing left to do, and the light that had been running through the glyphs gathered there, under both our hands, bright enough that I had to look away from it and couldn't. When it spoke, the voice didn't come from a mouth. It came up through the stone and the ground both, low and even, like something said once and meant to last a long time after. Queen of the Unyielding Furrow, it said, the ground remembers who refused to leave it. That was all. No second line, no explanation offered the way a person offers an explanation when they expect you not to believe them. It simply knelt there in the last of the gold light with its palm still open under mine, as if the saying of it had finished the only task it had been left there to do, and the rest belonged to me now. My father didn't ask me what it meant. None of them did, not that night. I think they understood, the way you understand a thing in your chest before you have words ready for your mouth, that whatever order had set that shape kneeling in our field hadn't been waiting on a bloodline, or a name carried down through marriages and wills, or anything a person could be born into without earning. It had been waiting on whoever proved, one spadeful at a time, that they would not let a dying piece of ground go quiet without a fight. That was the only inheritance the stone had ever been built to recognize, and it had taken 3 generations of us breaking our backs over rust-colored dirt before one of us finally earned it without knowing she was trying to. We didn't move south that autumn. I won't tell you the field came back whole overnight, because it didn't, and I'd be lying if I said the warden did anything more in the weeks that followed than kneel there in the gold evening light with its palm still turned upward, patient in a way that made our patience look young by comparison. But the co-op engineers came out twice that fall to take soil readings they couldn't explain, and the numbers, slow and stubborn as everything else on that ridge, started climbing, instead of falling for the first time since before I was born. Word got out, the way it does on a colony small enough that everyone's business is everyone's business. Families from 3 ridges over came to stand at the edge of our field and look at the kneeling shape with the gold light still pooled faint in its open palm. None of them touched it. I don't think the ground would have answered if they had, not out of spite, but because it had already found the hand it was looking for, and that kind of waiting, once it ends, doesn't start again for the next person who happens by. I go out most evenings still, after the real work is done, and I put my hand against that open stone palm the way you'd put a hand on a door you meant to keep from closing. I don't fully understand yet what it costs to carry a title an ancient thing only ever gives once, to ground that doesn't ask your permission before it starts changing you in return. But I know the field is still ours. I know my father sleeps easier than he has in 3 years. And I know now, with a plainness that has nothing grand or gilded about it, exactly what kind of stubbornness that stone spent 1,000 winters in the dark waiting for. It wasn't blood, it was never blood, it was just somebody who refused to leave.